The young waitress gently slid the plate of French toast toward the girl, whispering, "Same as always, honey. No charge." She never asked her name, never expected anything in return. But that morning, the entire neighborhood froze as four gleaming Mercedes-Benz G 63 SUVs pulled up outside the diner. A distinguished woman in an impeccable suit stepped out, holding a carefully folded letter in her hand. Who were they, and why did everyone stand so still? Bold Thread brings you stories that matter. Sarah Reynolds was 32 years old, a waitress at Blue Sky Diner, a modest establishment nestled between a bookstore and a flower shop in coastal Oregon. Her life followed the same pattern each day. Rise before the sun, walk 5 blocks to work, tie her faded green apron around her waist, and welcome the morning customers with a warm smile that concealed the emptiness within her. She lived alone in a studio apartment above the local bakery, her walls adorned with photographs that had faded with time. Her mother had passed when she was 16, her father 3 years later. The grandmother who had taken her in had moved to Florida for her health, leaving Sarah with little more than birthday calls and occasional postcards. On a Wednesday in early September, Sarah first noticed the girl. She couldn't have been more than 9, small for her age, with watchful eyes that seemed to absorb everything while revealing nothing. She sat in the window booth closest to the exit, a purple backpack too heavy for her frame placed beside her, and always a different book open before her. The first time she ordered only a glass of orange juice. Sarah brought it with a smile and a colorful paper straw. The girl thanked her with a nod so slight it was barely noticeable. The second day, the same. The third day, the same. The fourth day, the same. By the second week, Sarah had observed the pattern. The girl would arrive at 7:30 precisely 30 minutes before school began at the elementary 2 blocks down. She would sit, read, sip her juice slowly, watching as other customers ordered towers of French toast, omelets, bacon, and hash browns. At 7:55, she would close her book, thank Sarah, and leave having eaten nothing. On the 14th day, Sarah accidentally brought her a plate of French toast. "Oh, I'm sorry," she said, placing it down as if confused. "The kitchen made an extra. I'll just leave it here instead of throwing it away." The girl looked up, wariness and hunger battling in her eyes. "It's all right," Sarah reassured her. "Sometimes the cooks get the orders confused. Better to eat it than waste it, don't you think?" She walked away before the girl could protest, watching from behind the counter as she hesitantly picked up the fork. When Sarah returned 10 minutes later, the plate was empty, and the girl's eyes remained fixed on her book, a deliberate avoidance that tugged at Sarah's heart. "Thank you," she whispered as Sarah collected the plate. It became their unspoken ritual. Each morning, Sarah would bring the mistaken order, or the extra batch the cook made. French toast one day, scrambled eggs and toast the next, oatmeal with honey when the mornings grew cooler. The girl never asked for anything, never initiated conversation beyond a quiet "thank you," but she ate every bite, sometimes so quickly it seemed she feared the food might vanish. "Who's that kid you keep serving?" Frank, a retired firefighter who occupied the same booth every morning, asked one day. "Never seen her parents." "Don't know," Sarah admitted, "but she's hungry." Lisa, who worked the grill, cornered Sarah in the storage room after the 4th week. "You're feeding a stray," she said, not unkindly, but with the practicality of someone who had seen good intentions lead to disappointment. "You give handouts, they never learn gratitude. She'll just disappear one day. They always do." Sarah didn't argue. She simply shrugged and said, "It's okay. I used to know what it's like to watch others eat." It was the most personal information she'd shared with her coworkers in the 4 years she'd worked at Blue Sky. The girl never volunteered her name, and Sarah never asked. Something in her demeanor, the careful way she entered and exited, how she positioned herself to see both the door and the parking lot, told Sarah that questions would only drive her away. Instead, she made sure her juice glass stayed full, that the French toast was always warm, and that the diner felt like a sanctuary where she could breathe easier for 25 minutes each morning. Sometimes, when the diner was quiet and the girl was absorbed in her book, Sarah would allow herself to wonder, was she living nearby? Did she have family? Why was she always alone, and why did hunger seem like a familiar companion to her? But she pushed the thoughts away. In her experience, kindness with conditions wasn't kindness at all. So she continued their silent arrangement, watching as the girl's shoulders gradually lowered from their perpetually defensive posture, as her eyes began to meet Sarah's for a moment longer each time she approached her table. That small change, the eye contact that stretched from a fraction of a second to perhaps two, was enough to convince Sarah that whatever she was doing, however small it might be, mattered. By the 8th week, others had noticed Sarah's routine with the girl. Most said nothing, but some couldn't resist commenting, their observations tinged with the particular cruelty of those who have forgotten what it means to need help. "Playing social worker on company time?" asked a businessman who frequented the diner, his tone suggesting he found the entire arrangement distasteful. "Kids these days expect handouts everywhere," remarked another regular. "In my day, no one gave away free food just because someone looked sad." Sarah heard these comments but let them roll off her like raindrops from an umbrella. She had learned early that defending kindness often hardened the hearts of those who criticized it. However, Doug, the diner's manager, wasn't so easily ignored. He called Sarah into the cramped office behind the kitchen one morning, his expression serious beneath his perpetually furrowed brow. "I've been watching you with that kid," he said, fingers drumming against the worn desk. "Can't have employees giving away free meals. It's bad for business and sets a precedent." Sarah twisted her apron in her hands. "I understand. I'll cover the cost myself." Doug's eyebrows shot up. "From your tips? Those barely cover your rent." "It's my choice," Sarah replied, something resolute in her voice that made Doug study her more carefully. "Just one meal a day I can manage." After a moment, Doug sighed. "Fine. But if it affects your work, or if that kid causes any trouble, it stops immediately. Understand?" Sarah nodded, relief washing over her. She'd anticipated being reprimanded, perhaps even fired, but this compromise she could live with. Each morning, she set aside a portion of her tips, money that might have gone toward a new phone or the dental work she'd been postponing, and paid for the girl's breakfast. On a particularly rainy Thursday in November, the girl didn't show up. Sarah found herself checking the door every few minutes, an uneasy feeling settling in her stomach. She prepared her usual plate of French toast anyway, setting it at her empty booth just in case. "Waste of food," Lisa muttered as she passed by, shaking her head. By closing time, the untouched plate had become a silent rebuke. Sarah wrapped the cold French toast and took it home, unable to simply throw it away. The girl didn't appear the next day either, or the next. A week passed with no sign of her, and Sarah began to wonder if Lisa had been right. Had she simply moved on, as strays often did? The thought left her with a hollow ache she couldn't quite explain. She'd known nothing about her, not her name, not her story, yet her absence felt significant, a small light extinguished. "Told you," Lisa said on the 9th day of her absence, not unkindly, but with the assurance of someone whose pessimism had once again been validated. They never stick around once the free ride ends. During this period, Sarah noticed a customer taking photos of the empty booth where she still occasionally left a meal, just in case. The next day, she discovered why. A local community forum had shared the images with a mocking caption, "Blue Sky Diner now serving imaginary charity cases." The comments were even worse. "Publicity stunt. Bet they'll claim the food goes to underprivileged children while throwing it away. Feeding strays just creates dependency. That waitress needs a reality check. Next time a strange kid approaches you, remember this, you're being set up for something." Sarah had never considered herself particularly vulnerable to others' opinions, but the cruelty of these comments stung. That night, alone in her apartment, she questioned her actions for the first time. Was she foolish to help someone without knowing anything about them? Was she projecting her own past onto a situation she didn't understand? Seeking comfort, she opened the small ceramic box where she kept her most precious possessions. Inside lay a faded photograph of her mother in her nurse's uniform, her smile gentle despite the obvious fatigue in her eyes. Beside it was the small leather-bound journal her mother had carried through her years of night shifts, the pages worn from frequent handling. Sarah opened it to a dog-eared page, reading the words she knew by heart. "Shared my lunch with a homeless woman today. Caroline said I was naive, that she'd just used the money for drugs. Maybe, but the look in her eyes when she ate, same as mine when Dad would save me the last piece of pie during the hard times. No one grows poor by sharing what they have, but those who forget to share remain hungry their whole lives. Sarah traced her finger over her mother's handwriting, a sudden clarity washing over her. She didn't need to know the girl's name or story to recognize hunger. And hunger, whether physical or emotional, asked for bread, not questions. Nobody knew the girl's name. Nobody remembered the face of the person who helped. But each morning, someone wasn't hungry anymore. If you still believe small acts can change someone's life, please type faith and subscribe to Bold Thread for more inspiring stories. On the morning of the girl's 25th absence, Sarah arrived at the diner with diminished expectations. The habit of looking toward the door at 7:30 remained, but the sharp anticipation had dulled to a quiet resignation. Still, she prepared a small plate of French toast, just in case, and placed it at her usual booth. At 9:42 a.m., everything changed. The first sign was the sudden quiet that fell over the usually bustling diner. Sarah, refilling coffee at a booth near the kitchen, glanced up to see 4 sleek Mercedes-Benz G 63 SUVs with tinted windows pulling into the small parking lot. They moved with choreographed precision, forming a semicircle in front of the entrance. Customers stopped mid-conversation, forks paused halfway to mouths. Outside, pedestrians slowed to stare as uniformed security personnel emerged from the vehicles, standing at attention beside each door. From the lead SUV stepped a woman whose presence commanded attention before her attire did. Tall, with the composed demeanor of someone accustomed to authority, she wore an impeccably tailored suit, her silver hair styled in a precise bob that framed sharp features. She scanned the diner's facade before walking purposefully toward the entrance, flanked by 2 younger assistants. The bell above the door chimed as they entered, the sound unusually loud in the expectant silence. Doug emerged from the back office, smoothing his hair nervously. "Can I help you, ladies and gentlemen?" he asked, his voice higher than usual. The silver-haired woman removed her sunglasses. "I'm looking for someone who works here. A woman named Sarah." The diner became so quiet, Sarah could hear the soft hum of the refrigerator behind the counter. All eyes turned toward her as she stepped forward, coffee pot still in hand. "I'm Sarah," she said, trying to keep her voice steady despite the sudden dryness in her throat. The woman's stern expression softened slightly. "Sarah Reynolds?" She nodded, setting down the pot before her trembling hands could betray her anxiety. "My name is Judge Victoria Harrington, Chief Justice of the State Supreme Court." She reached into her leather portfolio and withdrew an envelope, crisp and official-looking. "I'm here because of a promise made to my goddaughter." She extended the envelope toward Sarah. "This is a letter from the governor's office, and I have a personal message as well, from Emma's mother." "Emma?" Sarah repeated, the name unfamiliar yet somehow significant. "The girl you've been feeding for the past several months," Judge Harrington explained. "Emma Martinez. Her mother was District Attorney Sophia Martinez, one of the finest legal minds I've ever mentored." The past tense landed like a physical weight on Sarah's shoulders. "I don't understand," she said, still not taking the envelope. "Is Emma okay?" "She's safe," the judge assured her. "She's with her uncle now in Seattle. But for almost 4 months, she came here every morning before school, after her mother went into protective custody due to death threats from a drug cartel she was prosecuting." The pieces began falling into place for Sarah. The girl's solitude, her careful watchfulness, the hunger that seemed deeper than physical need. What D.A. Martinez didn't know, the judge continued, was that the security detail assigned to Emma was compromised. The officer abandoned his post shortly after her mother entered protection. Emma was too afraid of being found by the cartel to tell anyone. She managed alone, using the small emergency fund her mother had left, making meals stretch beyond imagination. A collective murmur of shock rippled through the diner. Sarah felt her heart constricting as she imagined Emma, now with a name, with a story, trying to survive alone, waiting for a mother who couldn't be with her. "Sophia Martinez was killed in a car bombing 3 weeks ago," Judge Harrington said, her voice professional but not without emotion. In her final recorded statement, she asked that we thank the woman named Sarah at the diner who fed Emma without asking questions. She opened the envelope, removing a handwritten note on legal pad paper. She wrote, "If anything happens to me, please find the person who has been giving my daughter breakfast." Emma mentioned her in our secure video calls. She said she never asked why she was alone or made her feel ashamed. She just fed her, day after day, expecting nothing. Tell her she didn't just feed a hungry child, she preserved the dignity of a prosecutor's daughter when the system failed her. Sarah accepted the letter with trembling hands, tears blurring her vision. The judge's voice seemed to come from far away as she continued. The letter was read at D.A. Martinez's memorial service. When Emma finally told us about you, the entire legal community made it our mission to find you and thank you in person. What you did, her voice caught briefly, what you did for the child of one of our own, without even knowing who she was, that means something to all of us. The diner had fallen completely silent. Even those who had mocked Sarah's actions sat motionless, faces reflecting shock and in some cases shame. Judge Harrington straightened to her full height, her demeanor formal yet deeply respectful. On behalf of the state judicial system, the colleagues of District Attorney Martinez, and most importantly, on behalf of Emma, thank you. Sarah stood frozen, overwhelmed by the knowledge that her simple acts of kindness, French toast and eggs, a glass of juice, a smile without questions, had meant so much to a girl living through unimaginable circumstances, to a mother fighting her last battles far from home. "I didn't know," she finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just couldn't let her go hungry." The judge nodded. "Sometimes that's enough, Miss Reynolds. Sometimes feeding a hungry child without asking why they're hungry is the greatest kindness of all." As if on cue, every legal professional in the room, and every security officer standing outside by the vehicles stood at attention in a gesture of profound respect. The customers in the diner, moved by the ceremony unfolding before them, rose to their feet in silent tribute. Sarah, the quiet waitress who had lived nearly invisibly for years, stood in the center of it all, clutching a mother's last thank you in her hands. A woman whose small daily kindness had preserved not just a child's well-being, but a prosecutor's honor and peace of mind in her final days. The week following the judge's visit transformed Blue Sky Diner in ways no one could have predicted. The story spread through town like wildfire, jumping from conversation to social media to the local newspaper. The same community forum that had mocked Sarah's charity case now shared a heartfelt retelling of D.A. Martinez's letter, gathering thousands of shares and supportive comments. Regular customers began requesting Sarah's section specifically. They left generous tips with notes of appreciation. "Thank you for reminding us what matters, and my sister is a public defender. Your kindness gives me hope." Doug, who had initially grudged Sarah's free French toast, hung a small scales of justice beside the booth where Emma had sat. Beneath it, he placed a discreet plaque, reserved for those who serve justice and the families who wait. The booth was never empty again, occupied by legal professionals passing through town, and occasionally by families clearly struggling but treated with quiet dignity by the staff. On the 7th day after the judge's visit, a manila envelope arrived addressed to Sarah. Inside was a handwritten letter on colorful stationery, the carefully formed letters betraying the youth of its author. "Dear Miss Sarah, I didn't know your name until that day the judge came to find you. But every morning for those months, you were the only person who looked at me like I wasn't invisible or broken. Mom always told me that real heroes don't wear capes or robes, they just do what's right when no one is watching. But I think sometimes they wear aprons too. When Mom stopped calling, I thought the world had forgotten both of us, but you remembered me every day, even when I couldn't tell you why I was alone. Uncle Michael is nice, he's teaching me to play chess, and he makes good spaghetti, but I miss Mom, and sometimes I miss your French toast too. Thank you for not asking questions when I couldn't answer them. Your friend, Emma Martinez. P.S. I finished the book I was reading. It didn't have a happy ending, but it had a brave one." Sarah framed the letter and hung it behind the counter. Not prominently, not for show, but as a personal reminder of why small kindnesses matter. When customers asked about it, she would simply smile and say, "Just a thank you note from a special customer." Word of the diner's connection to the DA's case spread throughout legal communities. Attorneys passing through town made detours to visit, often leaving business cards or small donations for youth safety programs as tokens of appreciation. These, too, found their place on a small bulletin board behind the counter, a growing collage of gratitude from around the state. 3 months after the judge's visit, a school group came to the diner for lunch after a field trip. A 9-year-old boy with curious eyes studied Sarah as she refilled water glasses. "My mom says you're a hero," the child announced matter-of-factly. "Do you feel like one?" Sarah smiled, kneeling to meet the boy's gaze. "No, sweetheart, I'm just someone who knows what it feels like to be hungry, not just for food, but for kindness," the boy's teacher added quietly, having overheard the exchange. Sarah looked up, meeting the woman's understanding gaze with a nod. The teacher was right. Hunger came in many forms. Food was only the most obvious. As spring approached, the diner hosted a fundraiser for children in the Witness Protection Program, raising enough to establish a small emergency fund for families displaced by violence. Doug, surprisingly, matched the donations personally, admitting to Sarah that her quiet persistence had changed something in him. "Never understood why my sister was so obsessed with helping runaway teens," he confessed. "Drove our parents crazy. But I think I get it now. Sometimes a meal is more than food." On a quiet Wednesday morning, almost exactly a year after Emma had first walked into the diner, Sarah arrived for her shift to find something small and elegant on her usual station. A silver medallion, the kind given to recognize extraordinary public service, lay beside her order pad. One side bore the state seal, the other had been custom engraved. "Semper Vigilans, always watchful." Sarah looked around the empty diner, searching for whoever might have left it, finding no one. She stepped outside, scanning the street as the early morning breeze gently stirred the wind chimes hanging above the entrance. No unusual cars were parked nearby, no waiting messengers, just the town waking up, sprinklers ticking on lawns, and the distant sound of the school bus making its first rounds. She slipped the medallion into her pocket, its weight a comforting reminder that kindness offered without expectation sometimes returns in unexpected ways. That evening, as she hung her apron before heading home, Sarah noticed Doug placing a new sign in the diner's window, simple but elegant. It read, "Whoever you are, whatever you can pay, no one leaves hungry." When he caught her watching, he shrugged self-consciously. New policy. Figured it was time. Sarah smiled, understanding the unspoken acknowledgement in his gesture. No grand speeches, no public declarations, just a quiet commitment to see the hunger in others and respond with what was needed most. Food without judgment, kindness without questions. As she walked home in the fading light, the medallion a solid presence in her pocket, Sarah thought about Emma, now growing up with her uncle in Seattle, carrying her mother's memory, and, perhaps she hoped, the knowledge that even in one's darkest moments, kindness exists in unexpected places. Not everyone who helps needs recognition. Some people just need to know that today, someone isn't hungry, and that alone is enough to change a life. You might forget this story in a few days, but if nobody retells it, history will remain silent forever. Subscribe to Bold Thread, where justice, kindness, and memory are protected until the end.